Sorry for the delay, Mr. Chair. Ready to go when you are.
Good morning, everyone. I am City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022, and we are here today for a virtual hearing on docket number 0185, petition for a special law regarding an act granting the City of Boston the authority to provide legal voting rights in municipal elections for City of Boston residents aged 16 and 17 years old, referred to the committee on January 26, 2022. This docket was sponsored by the councilors Julia Mejia and Kenzie Bach. In accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirements that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom and is being recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to the public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/citycounciltv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of our record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. We are joined today by my council colleagues, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Bach, Councilor Braden, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, and Councilor Lara. We are also joined by members of the administration, Commissioner Anita Tavares and Assistant Registrar Sabino Pimonte from the Elections Department. We have a number of advocates who will be testifying as panelists today, including Willie Sullivan from the Electoral Reform Society, Executive Director Cheryl Crawford and Director Vanessa Snow from Mass Vote, Brandon Klugman from Generation Citizen, and Naysaj Ware, a youth advocate. This home rule petition would authorize the City of Boston to allow any individual age 16 or 17 who is a resident of Boston to be able to vote as long as they are eligible under state law for all other qualifications other than age. These individuals would be added to a list of voters established and maintained by the Board of Election Commissioners and would be allowed to vote for local offices and ballot questions. This would be done by having them fill out an alternative registration form. The Board of Elections would be responsible for associated costs. The petition would also grant the board the authority to implement regulations associated with this act. When the individual turns 18, they will be removed from the separate list and informed that they must register to vote in accordance with state law. I'm going to now turn it over to my council colleagues, starting with the two original sponsors, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach, followed by the rest of my council colleagues by order of arrival. Councilor Mejia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Chair, for hosting this, and to my colleague, Councilor Bach, for being all things youth engagement and empowerment. It's always great to work with you. I just wanted to note that Naysaj Ware is one of our panelists, and she is in the attendees list, so if we can promote her. And then I also see that Cheryl and Vanessa and Brandon are also here, so just wanted to give you all the FYI in that. And Naysaj will have to go first since obviously she's a youth and in school and she got permission to be here. So I just want to make sure that we can lead with her if possible. And so I'll be really brief with my remarks. You know, for me as someone who worked with young people in the early stages of my career, and as someone who worked at MTV, trying to get young people registered to vote. What I heard in every space that I have been in is that young people don't really see themselves reflected in the decisions that elected officials are making. And what better way for us to change that than by creating an opportunity for young people to actually be able to have a say on who it is that is going to represent them. You know, young people are able to work and pay taxes. Young people are sitting in classrooms and participating in a number of different ways in our democracy, but when it comes to voting, that is the one opportunity that I believe we have to really ensure that youth voice is represented and that they have a seat at the table. You know, even in our school committee, we have a young person who sits on that school committee, but they don't even have a voting right. So we have an opportunity through this home rule petition to really change the way we do business. And I believe that by supporting lowering the voting age, we've already seen some local cities and towns, and even our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is all in on this. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and getting this home rule petition passed that will allow 16 to 17-year-olds residing in the city of Boston to be eligible to vote. So without further ado, I'm going to end there. Thank you so very much to all of those who participated in getting us this far, and we look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Councilor Mejia for partnering on this and all her work on youth and civic engagement. This is really important to me. I was a civics teacher in Boston Public Schools once a week, all while I was in college, and just saw there how engaged our young people are and are capable of being. And I think that often, we find ourselves in the weird situation where, on the one hand, we are constantly saying, oh, we think young people should get involved, they should be engaged, don't be apathetic. And then we set up voting in a way that, hits exactly at the moment of transition in a young person's life, whether they're going into work or further school, et cetera, moving out of their location. I mean, we really could hardly put eligibility for voting at a time more disruptive or harder for people to get registered than we do. And so I really feel as though it's important for us to think about how could we actually give this opportunity to not just have a voice and advocate, as many of our young people do, and we see them on the city council all the time, but to actually get that vote. Why don't we make that a thing that our youth can do when they're embedded in their communities, when they're in their high schools, when they can talk about it in the hallways? I think that if we mean it when we say that we want the next generation engaged, that we should do that. And then the one other thing I'll say about this is just that I had the opportunity to be living in the UK for a little while at the point at which the Scottish referendum for Scottish independence happened, and they gave the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. And they saw enormous participation by that demographic. And we're going to hear a little bit later on from a panelist about that. But I think the interesting thing there was that part of the rationale for it, part of the conversation was, well, these are people who, yeah, they're 16, 17, but they could live their whole life in a Scotland that's been transformed by the decision that we're making today. And so, it makes sense to give them the chance to make their voices heard because it's really going to affect their lives. And I just think that when we really think about that, that's so true about the important democratic decisions that we're making every year. And our young people, they deserve a voice in those. And I think, you don't have to spend a lot of time working with young people to see that they're more than ready to weigh in, and that often, they've thought about these issues just as deeply or more so than some of the older adults in their lives. So really glad that this can get a hearing today, and grateful to all the panelists who we'll be hearing from as well. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And we have also been joined by Councilor Louis Jen, Councilor Flynn, and Councilor Worrell. Councilor Braden, do you have any opening statements?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I want to thank the lead sponsors, Councillor Mejia and Councillor Bach, for bringing this issue forward. I think it's really important to try and increase the participation by all of our citizens in our democratic process. But I think particularly our younger folks, as Councillor Bach just mentioned, many of them are very well informed. They have concerns about the environment and schools and all of the issues that touch their lives every day, but they don't have any say in what the decisions are made. So I really feel this is important. The other thing I feel strongly about is the importance of civics education in schools. So I'm sure maybe we'll talk about that later in the conversation, but I look forward to the conversation this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the co-sponsors who brought this forward. I think this is a super important issue, right? 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, they are civically engaged and should have a voice. I think they know just as much about what's happening in their local government, or should know, and perfectly capable of making those decisions. I am looking forward to having more conversations about this and looking at the logistics of it, but I am certainly in support and look forward to more conversation. Thank you so much for the panelists who are here, taking the time out of their day to testify. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lara.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone, and good morning to all of the panelists. Thank you to co-sponsors, and for holding this hearing ultimately. Sorry, I'm trying to land a little bit from running around this morning. There is a proverb that says that nothing about us without us is for us. And I think that that is perfectly fitting to start this morning. I got my start in the youth justice movement. I went to my first protest when I was 13 and started working on my first campaign by the time that I was 15. By the time that I was 16, 17, going to city council meetings and testifying was normal for me. Organizing in my neighborhood was what we did. And every time that there was an issue, myself and my friends were either getting together to figure out, you know, if we power map this, what is our strategy to get this issue solved? And if we can't get it solved, then what are we going to do to solve it ourselves? I am a co-founder of one of the first by youth for youth organizations here in the city of Boston. At least out of my generation, we had a in the 90s, because my friends and I believed in youth power. We knew that we were the ones that were most directly impacted by the decisions that were being made, and therefore we should be the ones to be giving solutions to the issues in our neighborhoods and with our friends and families. So I think that this is another step to get us closer to really realizing that vision of giving young people voice over the decisions that impact their lives. I'm incredibly supportive of this, and I'm looking forward to hear from all of the panelists and working on this with Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. And the next two will be Councilor Louis Jen, followed by President Flynn.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this. And I want to thank everyone who is here this morning. I want to thank the sponsors, my colleagues, Councilor Bach and Councilor Mejia. As everyone has said, our young people lead the way in so many different ways and oftentimes are our own moral compass. Voting is only one of the ways in which people can be involved civically and in which to participate in the democratic process. But it's a really important way. It's also just a really good strategic move to get folks involved at the age of 16 and 17 while they're learning about the civil rights movement, while they're learning about all these folks who have been shut out, women, Black folks, from accessing the franchise act, paralleling them learning about that. They too then leave their high school classroom at 2:45 or whatever in the afternoon and then go vote and exercise their right. So I am fully supportive of this. It's also a really great time for habit formation, and that we've seen that in other cities that have allowed people to vote. You get people interested when they're young and still at home. It creates a habit of voting. And in an era where so many states and so many other places are restricting the right to vote and access a ballot, it's time for us to lead and lean in and be the ones that are showing, no, what we should be doing is at every opportunity, expanding the right to vote. And so I am fully supportive of this. Young people, as folks have said, they're working, paying taxes. They're going to be affected by climate change, by all the things that are going on. And so they should be centered in these conversations. So thank you again to the sponsors, Councilors Bach and Councilor Mejia. Looking forward to this, working on this ordinance and making this a reality for so many of our young folks who are going to be testifying today and who are already such great leaders in our city. So thank you.
Thank you. Council President Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the sponsors, Councilor Bach, Councilor Mejia. Thank you to the panelists for being here. I'm here to learn about the proposal. I don't have any formal opening statement, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have been joined by Councilor Flaherty. The next two will be Councilor Worrell and then Councilor Flaherty.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Obviously, just looking forward to the hearing and the discussion, and hopefully it'll be an impetus to have civics return to the Boston Public Schools. If we're going to ask folks to engage civically and politically, then nothing more appropriate than having our Boston Public Schools not only have a focus on civics, but also start to maybe teach to the Boston economy would also be helpful. But look forward to the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the sponsors, Councilor Bach and Councilor Mejia. And anytime we're having a conversation about engaging more people into the voter population, I'm all for it. So I'm very interested in the conversation and wanting to see how we can get more people to be more civically engaged and have more voices at the table. So thank you again to Councilor Bach and Councilor Mejia for this hearing, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Councilor Rell. And now we have two panels. We have the administration, who's going to talk about sort of the parts of this that work for the administration and how we get this done. And then we have the advocates panel. Naysaj, I believe I was told you are at school. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes, but I have a free period, so I'm not in a rush.
Okay, perfect. So you're good.
But could I actually, Councilor Arroyo, could I just advocate, because she's in a class period, and if we wait for the administration to go and ask all of those questions by the time we get to massage, so I would like to advocate that we lead with youth voice if possible, and give Naysaj an opportunity to share her remarks so that we can ask her our questions before she needs to, eventually.
Sure. So Naysaj, what time do you actually have to go back to class?
11:30. 11:30.
11:30. So an hour from now. Okay, yeah. I think we'll be fine in that time frame if we just let the administration go first, unless you have a bunch of questions for the administration, Councilor Mejia.
It's not even so much about the questions that I have for the administration. It's just about just setting the tone and leading with youth voice as part of this whole idea. And in the future, hopefully we could just get the time restraints told to the office beforehand so that we don't have to. That was our mistake. We actually had a little scheduling hiccup, so we got lucky that we were able to make this happen.
No worries, just in the future so that we can plan for it. But Naysaj, if you have a written statement, you are welcome to read from that now. If it's just from the heart, you can do that too. But the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Naysaj Ware, senior at the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science. Personally, I feel as though the most common argument made against lowering the voting age is that youth are uneducated and disinterested in politics. I served as the youth liaison for Boston City Councilor at Large Susan Mejia, and as the youth deputy campaign manager for former Everett City Councilor at Large Curly Adrian. And through canvassing, I have realized that adults are just as uneducated and disinterested as public officials assume that youth are in politics. Also, the argument that young people are uneducated is essentially naive and oblivious to the reality of our society, because what exactly defines an adult, especially in the social climate that we live in now? Barring 16 and 17-year-olds from effectively participating in their democratic government is essentially adultist and upholds ageism in politics. I strongly believe that most people do not fear 16 and 17-year-olds making ill-informed decisions. They fear young people's progressive agendas and inevitable change for the government as a result of lowering the voting age. The city of Boston claims to want to increase youth civic engagement and youth voice in government, so lowering the voting age will inevitably force young people, and more importantly, schools, to hold themselves accountable for being civically engaged and politically educated. This will increase civic classes and participation in civic classes in schools. Youth are often directly impacted by the decisions of government, thus it is only right that we have the opportunity to inform and influence the policy that we're impacted by. So in closing, I honestly feel as though Boston can be moved in a positive direction by lowering the voting age and expanding our demographic of voters. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love to see O'Brien in the house. Thank you for that. And when we get to the question and answer session, hopefully we've moved in a timely enough fashion that if folks have questions for you, we can get to you. I want to now start with the administration panel, which is Commissioner Anita Tavares from the Elections Department and Assistant Registrar Sabino Piemonte from the Elections Department. I believe they are both here. I see one. Yeah, I see both. Fantastic. So with that, I'm going to go over to Anita Tavares if you would like to make an opening statement.
Excuse me. Good morning, Chair Arroyo and members of the council. I want to thank you for holding this hearing today. My name is Anita Tavares. I am the chair of the Board of Election Commissioners. I'm happy to be invited here today to discuss the possibility of lowering the voting age in municipal elections to include 16 and 17-year-olds and what implementation would look like for our department. Our goal here is to always ensure that all registered voters, all eligible voters have access, and if that includes 16 and 17-year-olds, we are here to support and provide whatever tool necessary to make that happen.
Thank you. And I don't know if Mr. Piemonte, everybody's favorite employee at City Hall, I don't know if you have opening statements or not, or if you're just here for questions, but if you do have an opening statement, I'm happy to hear it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here for support and to help guide Commissioner Tavares.
This is why everybody loves you. Okay, so we have, so with that, I'm gonna turn it over to the original sponsors and then in order of arrival for questions. But Councilor Mejia, that would start with you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry about that. And thank you again, Councilor Arroyo, for your patience with us as we dealt with these last minute arrangements. So thank you for accommodating us. So Anesaj, just really quick, thank you for making yourself available to us this morning, and thank you to your teacher for allowing you to be here with us. You spoke about the viewpoint of young people who aren't interested or knowledgeable enough, and I really do appreciate you calling that out. And there are also a lot of people who oppose lowering the voting age because they think that young people aren't mature enough to vote. What would you say to some folks who think that?
I would honestly say that it goes the same for adults saying that youth are uneducated. Essentially, adults are just as immature as they claim that most youth were. And as I said before, I feel like there's no age that defines being an adult. Maturity comes with experience and education. Most young adults nowadays are taking more effort and taking more responsibility to be politically educated and be involved in their civic government. So it's only right that we, are able to do this fully by voting.
Can you share for our audience what it feels like to be a young person who's so civically engaged and feeling like you're fighting for equity in our education, you're fighting for youth jobs. Like, can you talk to us about what it feels like to continue to fight and feel like you're not being heard, and how voting may be able to potentially give you all a little bit more power in that?
It's definitely frustrating, especially when I'm at rallies with my counterparts who are 16 and 17 years old and we're unable to vote, and we have to go home to our parents who may be civically disengaged. For example, that was my personal issue, that my mom was very civically disengaged. She never voted in public elections, and I kind of had to urge her and force her to go and vote. And while that's a good thing that I'm getting my mom out there, I feel as though I should be able to make my own voice heard without having to go through parents and without having to beg adults to vote. All young people that are doing the work that adults should be doing should have a say in the policy that's directly impacting us.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then for the administration, what would you say when you're thinking about the logistics for registering 16 to 17-year-olds? What would that look like logistically for the city of Boston? Can you just kind of help us understand the magnitude of what the workload would look like, and kind of what your thinking is around this issue?
Well, currently, I will say that with pre-registration in our voter registration database, we have approximately 2,800. We have currently about 2,800 registered, pre-registrations, waiting for these individuals to turn 18 so that we can register them. We would have to consider a separate secure database to house our registered voters that's separate from what the state uses. And one of the reasons is that we also capture all of our census information in our database. And Mass General Law, Chapter 51, Section 4B, only allows the city of Boston to capture census information for residents that are 17 years of age or older. I believe this is one section that's going to need to be amended to allow us to capture residents that are 16 years of age. Those individual 16-year-olds are also redacted from any of our public, or we can't even include them in our database right now. But should we, right now, the law states that you can't provide any information, any public information on any 16-year-olds. And any registered voters, all registered voters, and anyone participating in any particular election, everyone knows that that is a public information. So that's something that we would have to have figured out.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do just have one more follow-up question. Then we have a lot of colleagues on this call, so I want to be super mindful of that. But I'm just curious, when we think about the lack of voter engagement, election after election, everybody talks about the low turnout. How would you envision given the opportunity for young people 16 to 17 to be able to also participate in elections, what would you see that number increasing? Would you think that it would make an impact if there is a sense of urgency from young people to want to participate, and now we've given them a platform to be able to do so? How would you see that increase in terms of voter engagement and turnout?
Well, I do agree that the earlier someone gets engaged, they do form this habit that carries on for the rest of their life. I've been voting since I was eligible to vote at age 18, and that's something was instilled in me very early. So I do believe that the sooner we can engage the youth, that they're more likely to develop this habit that's going to carry forward. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think any way we can increase the voter participation is great. And again, we will employ any resources that we need to make sure that the youth are informed and that they are aware of whatever their rights are. At the moment, we try to engage BPS as well. So now that we are in a pandemic stage, we are trying to get back into the schools, try to engage the youth. We were able to actually bring back our student poll worker program during the past municipal election, which we got about 40 youth engaged and working at our polls, and a lot of them tend to return. So it does show that there's an interest there from our youth to be involved in civics.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm gonna utilize the rest of my time to give to my colleagues, Councilor Arroyo, because I know we have lots of folks on the call.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I'm going to go to the other original co-sponsor on this, Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you, Commissioner. It's so good to hear your supportiveness of this, and also to understand some of the logistical issues that we have to focus on. And I guess it's really useful to know that you're not currently able to hold the information of the 16-year-olds, because I think you're right. That's clearly something that we need to add into a final version of this HRP. Is there anything else like that where you think that there's like legal requirements that we would need to adjust through this legislative vehicle in order to execute on this?
Not that crosses my mind at the moment, but if I do come up or think of something, I will make sure that I follow up.
Great, yeah, because obviously we certainly would not want to get the HRP through only to discover that we need another home rule petition for some data related aspect of this. So really appreciate you raising that. Could you tell me a little bit? I know that right now, am I right that there's a mechanism for 17-year-olds to register, to sort of pre-register to vote? Like they don't actually get to vote ahead of turning 18, but if they're gonna turn 18 by the election, there's an opportunity for them to register?
That is correct. With every transaction at a government agency, any 16 and 17-year-old can pre-register. So if they go to the Registry of Motor Vehicles for their permit, they can opt in to register, and they sit into a queue, and as soon as they turn 18, we automatically register them. So we do have currently almost 2,800 16 and 17-year-olds sitting in a queue pending their birthday.
Got it. And so in that context, we are able to hold, you're not able to hold a sort of like passive database of all the 16-year-olds in the city, but you are able to hold these people who have raised their hands and said, yes, as soon as I'm 18, I want to be registered.
That is correct.
Got it. So one flag I would have, and I don't think this requires any change in our legislation, but I'd love to know, you mentioned before that, we'd have these, if we went through with this, we'd have these folks in a special 16 to 17-year-old database. They'd be able to vote in the municipal elections. And then when they turn 18, they'd get out of that database and they need to register to vote. I think I would love us to think procedurally about a way that anybody who's sort of registering in that 16, 17-year-old pot is also simultaneously pre-registering for the regular state thing. Because the last thing I'd want is for us to have a bunch of enfranchised 16 and 17-year-olds who get used to voting and then discover that they've missed the sort of like paperwork to officially register when they're 18. So that's just one thing I found myself thinking when you were speaking.
I definitely think that would make the most sense for our department as well.
Yeah, but it's good to know that we already have a mechanism for that. Like you're already holding a list like that, so it should be pretty straightforward. Great. Yeah, I think, and just good to know that you guys are also, willing. I recognize that this would be a significant, additional piece of the puzzle on the election side, but I think it's so important. And I was thinking when Councilor Lara was talking about the fact that I would bet that almost every member of this Boston City Council was actively involved in election work before they turned 18. So I just think we all, this is a body full of folks who know that that's not a magic number for political engagement and concern about your community and civic involvement. So I think it's good for us to be talking about how we can make that practical knowledge that we all have, actually result in people's enfranchisement. I think those are all my questions, Mr. Chair, for the administration for now. Just to flag through you that as we think about, language of the HRP, definitely dealing with this data holding issue, I think we should all make sure we resolve before anything gets forwarded out of committee.
Certainly, and I don't think I gave an opening on this, but I'm obviously very supportive of this. I'm going to reserve my questions for the end of this session in terms of having everybody go through first, and we'll do that in order of arrival, which starts with Councilor Braden.
So so 16 and 17-year-olds will be registered to vote, and then the question is really just how many extra people would that bring into our voting rolls, yeah, that's really it. The way if you don't vote, you become inactive. If young people, is that system going to be continued? Like if a young person doesn't vote, will they be taken off, or will they be kept on the rolls? I know we don't have municipal elections, so if they register when they're 16, they will probably be 18 by the time the next municipal election would happen. So I'm concerned that process of becoming, if you're an early voter, I've known this from working with young people at the poll in campaigns recently. They were registered, but because they hadn't voted before, they were considered inactive. And then when they went to the polling station, they were having difficulties. They were given what do you call it?
Provisional.
A provisional ballot, yes. So they had a lot of hoops to go through. So I think hopefully this system might smooth that out.
Well, I will add that a voter's inactivation status has to do with their lack of response to the annual listing of residents and not whether or not they've actually voted. So as long as someone continues to respond to the annual census, their voting status is actually, they actually maintain an active voting status, which is why it's important that we address the census aspect of this that allows us to only capture residents 17 years of age and older.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, because I thought it was about voting patterns, if they had voted before or had not voted. And in terms of, just in terms of that city census and responses to that, what is the level of response to that?
Well, by the time we're done canvassing, we end up having a pretty high return rate, which I think last year it was about 80%. Return rate, but again, that is due to us having to go door to door to ensure that that residents are responding. We're hoping to leverage BPS this time around as well, and to have the youth get this information home to their parents so that they do understand the importance of filling out our census.
Very good. Okay, I know these are the little hurdles. You want to get the cohort of voters together. And then the next trick is to get them to vote. So I appreciate all your work. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson is next. And then just so folks can prepare, Councilor Lara, Councilor Louis-Jean, Councilor Flynn, followed by Councilor Ralph, followed by Councilor Flaherty. But Councilor Anderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. How do you pronounce your name, Ms. Ware? Is it, I'm sorry, Nasaj or Nasaj?
Yeah, like Mesaj.
Nasaj. First of all, go OB, right? Go Tigers. Thank you for being here. I'm so impressed by you and your presentation, and almost want to say I'm proud of you, but I don't want to sound patronizing. I think you are as brilliant as you present, and I really appreciate you just being here and participating in this process. So I guess, you know, and maybe you can add to this or give me some feedback. I have a 16-year-old in high school, and a 23-year-old, a 24-year-old, and a 25-year-old, all boys, right? And in order to create this level of engagement, civic engagement, I would imagine that we should connect it with some sort of classroom civic. I think Council Flaherty alluded to this, but I think of that as level of engagement connected to school. And I'm wondering how we're going to follow up, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach, how we can follow up with school, and how if this needs to be a filing where we include it in the curriculums. But civic engagement has, I think, declined in Boston Public Schools as well. So I think it's super important that we talk about that, and I think there's the engagement. Again, I have to reiterate that I strongly support this, because I believe that I remember at 13, I was working, providing for my family, and as an undocumented immigrant at the time, having to worry about what policies were affecting me at the time. So undocumented working, needing resources, living in the projects, all of these components. And I think about the marginalized population coming from Cape Verde at an early age, and you think about how to connect with resources. But I connected with Gloria Fox at the time, Chuck Turner, and even the governor, wanting or needing resources and wanting to understand policies as they could benefit or support me at the time. So I think that, again, I applaud you, Nesaj, and this is your moment, and this is definitely for you. At 16, you show the eloquence, and you've done your homework, you've done your research, and you're here and you're engaged. And I just really, my heart goes out to you, because I think this is super exciting. Although these meetings are boring, right? But it's super exciting, and we should be celebrating that such a beautiful thing has been filed. So thank you again for the co-sponsors. I look forward to supporting it. And Ms. Commissioner Tavares, thank you so much for your input and your insight, and look forward to working with you as well.
Same here.
Thank you, Councilor Fernandez Anderson. Councilor Lara, who will be followed by Councilor Louis Jen.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner, for giving us insight around implementation. I gave my maiden speech a couple of weeks ago and talked about expanding the electorate, and one of the ways is to give people with legal status the right to vote in municipal elections. And I think a lot of the implementation, a lot of the things around implementation that you're sharing will have some overlap if this also passes and we're adding more people to the voting rolls. So I really appreciate that. I don't know that I have any questions, but I just wanted to affirm this idea of civic education and expanding giving access to civic education. I want to invite us to broaden what we define as civic education, because it's not just about how city government works. My civic education did not happen at school. Civic education was already not happening there. It happened in political education groups in the neighborhood. It happened reading books together. It happened in organizing groups. And so thinking about youth justice and thinking about the ecosystem of young people in the city of Boston, not just through BPS, because BPS obviously has its own parameters and limitations to how they teach civics and what they can teach and what that looks like. And there has been a systemic divestment in the youth serving organizations and in the youth justice movement in the city of Boston for the past decade, where we've seen a bunch of the organizations that serve young people shutter. And so as a city, if we're saying, hey, we believe that 16, 17-year-olds are not only willing but capable and have the vision and the heart to vote and elect the people who are representing them, then we need to think about the youth ecosystem in the city and how we invest in that to make sure that they are, whatever we're defining as properly prepared to vote. Also, that there are a bunch of adults who are not properly prepared to vote and don't do any research. This is not like whatever excuse we're making about young people not knowing what's going on. Plenty of adults have no idea what's going on. Plenty of adults show up to the polls, and just check off the boxes, or whoever the incumbent is, or call someone who they know. So I think that it's not a good excuse, for us to put, but that there's a lot of work that we need to do to invest in the youth ecosystem in the city, to think about civic education, beyond just how local government works, and think about teaching movements and think about teaching history and getting people to organize, would be my advocacy for that. So I have no further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. Councilor Lara. Councilor Louis Jen.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks to Nesaj and to the panel for being here. Nesaj, thank you for standing up and being a voice for young folks in the city. I just want you to, if you've had these discussions with your friends, with other people, can you talk about the excitement around potentially getting that right to vote, and what you've been talking about with your friend groups when it comes to accessing the ballot? I'd be curious to hear what does the conversation sound like when you all are talking about what voting would look like for you all and how it would be an empowering experience and part of one of the ways in which you participate in the democratic process.
Yes, of course. Thank you for that question. I think it's important that I point out that before I was actually against lowering the voting age, and that was because I felt as though I was always so civically engaged, but my friends weren't, and so I was like, what? If my friends got to vote, that would be bad. And then after being around other young people that were civically engaged and realizing that this is actually the majority of Boston's youth, that they're civically engaged and they're politically educated and they want to know more about what's happening, I realized that that the same climate that we look at for youth, there are some that's not engaged and there's some that are the same climate that we look at in adults. So when I talk about it with my friends, they're excited because, again, we're getting to influence the policy that directly impacts us, but also that it's going to start holding city councilors and mayors and other government officials accountable for coming to our schools so that we know who you are. I run a girls program. My girls are in middle school, and I ask them who the mayor is, and they have no idea. They're still saying Menino, and I'm like, no, guys, and they don't know who a city councilor is, and they don't even know what you guys do, and I think it's important that they do, because not only are our schools not teaching that, but our city councilors aren't at schools, because right now you guys don't have to be. We're not your demographic. And so when we talk about that, we talk about just having more people know and having more youth know what exactly a city councilor does, what exactly a mayor does, how they impact us, and I think that's going to be important for young people across the city.
Thank you, Nesaj. Yeah, and I think it's even important because even if someone may not know who the mayor is, or the city council is, giving them that right to vote may be what sparks their interest in being right. So even if it didn't exist before, it can be what sparks it. So I appreciate your words and sharing that. And I want to thank Commissioner Tavares and of course Sabino for being here and shedding light on what this would look like. I guess one question I have is, if hopefully the successful and 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to vote, what would that look like in terms of participating or voting on issues like charter amendments, referendums, initiative petitions, things that we depend on state government to authorize? Would young people also be able to vote for those, or if there's a state ballot measure in that year, would we have to print separate ballots for that? So, for 16 and 17-year-olds who may not be able to vote on a state ballot measure. So what does that look like, and have we thought about that? Or is that, if those questions are premature, I just wanted to put them out there for now.
I would imagine that with respect to having a state ballot and a municipal ballot, that's a dual election, that you would have to have two separate ballots and maintain two separate voting lists. And things of that nature. But some of the questions would all depend on what is allowed in the policy aspect of it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Flynn, do you have any questions for this panel? I think we actually have lost Councillor Flynn. Councillor Worrell.
Thank you, Nasaj, and thank you, Commissioner Tavares and Sabino. Always a pleasure seeing you. No further questions at this time, but thank you for lending your voice, Nasaj, to this conversation, and please continue advocating, for your community and for your age group and for the youth. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. And so my questions, I think, have already been asked, but in terms of the registration process, if we are able to successfully create this, which I think we should, 16 is also the age that you can begin, unless they changed it. I know I got my license at 16 and a half, for better or worse. But in terms of registration for 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, usually the way we catch this is the catch-all is usually RMB. What would we have to actively do, I guess, to make the registration process for kids at 16 easier to do, right? We're talking about limited mobility in some cases, limited access to certain tool sets. Like what are some of the ways in which we can, that they have sort of equal access to registration?
Again, that would all depend on the policy. We do encourage the online voter registration system when we are registering voters. As you mentioned, the RMV is seems to be a pretty successful tool, or the automatic voter registration seems to be very, very successful in driving up our voter registration numbers. So that's a tool that is heavily utilized. It's not just the registry of motor vehicles, it's any government agency, any transaction with a government agency. Individuals can register to vote there. We do have to, I think we still need a separate paper registration. If we are going to lower the voting age, we would have to create a separate paper registration for when we do attend or hold voter registration drives in the schools, which is something that we do. We try to get into all of BPS high schools, all of the independent schools as well in the city of Boston, so that we can register youth and so they know what their options are. We do our best here to try and engage them, and we are finding now that COVID is over, everyone is kind of opening up their arms to us again and allowing us into their buildings so that we can get youth registered. So those that are not doing it online, at least we have someone there who's helping them walk through the voter registration process.
Thank you. And then just a question on the numbers. I know somebody else asked this, but do we have sort of an estimate of what the 16-year-olds and 17-year-old population would look like if we opened it up to register? Did that already get answered? I'm sorry if I missed that.
I can't speak to how much is going to grow in the future, but currently we have 2,800 16 and 17-year-olds sitting in a queue waiting for them to turn 18.
So that's how that works technically, right? You get to see the folks before they turn 18. That was my next question, actually, is how many new 18-year-old registered voters do we get on any given year?
Do you know how many approximately? We'd have to get back to you with those numbers.
Yep, that's perfectly fine. But we do have those numbers, basically, is what we're saying, so that we do track that.
Yes.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Thank you. And then I'm just trying to make sure I go through all the administration stuff so I can release you. In terms of the question on the municipal, what elections are we saying 16, 17-year-olds can vote for? Is there something special that has to happen if we want them to have access? So for instance, can they vote in municipal, state, and federal elections? If we change this just for municipal.
That would be a lot of legislative change, so that would all depend on what you guys are advocating for.
I see both of the makers' hands went up on that. I'll do it in order of the hand going up. Councilor Bach.
I was just going to say, Councilor Roy, I think the reason that it's specified municipal is that at the state elections level, it would create like a equal protection issue if 16, 17-year-olds were allowed to vote in Boston, but not in other cities and towns for the same, like for governor or whatever. So basically, the lowering of the voting age for state elections would need to happen statewide. It couldn't be done at an HRP. And so that's why it's not that Councilor Mejia and I wouldn't like for that statewide or national change to happen, but in terms of what we can propose a Boston City Council home rule petition for, it has to stick to municipal.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. And Councilor Mejia, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think, Councilor Arroyo, I really do appreciate your question in regards to the numbers, because the point that I was trying to get at is really to help demonstrate the opportunity that we have to expand voter turnout and engagement in municipal elections. So the data in terms of how many 16 to 17-year-olds, I know that you don't capture the data for 17 and under, but just even to have a sense of like how many 17-year-olds we could potentially include in a said upcoming municipal election. I think that if there's a way for us to really drive that point home in terms of expanding the electorate through this process, I think it is worth knowing what that number could look like. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I do have a question if he's here for, because I do believe he'll probably be the one to be able to answer this for Sabino Piemonte, but I know that in other states and cities, they do out of precinct voting. This sounds sort of unrelated, but it isn't. And I'll tell you how and why. But basically, I know other states and cities do out of precinct voting, which for folks listening means I can vote wherever, and then that vote will get counted in my precinct in my city. So like if you work at a building or you go to a school, for example, even if it is not your precinct where you are supposed to vote, you can vote there, and then that vote gets counted. Other places do this, namely New Mexico does out of precinct voting. My question here for Sabino or for Ms. Tavares is, could Boston do that? The reason I'm thinking about that is if you have students, usually the election is the first Tuesday when students are in school. A number of, I can't put a total number to it, but a number of our polling precincts are actually schools. And so even if that is not the school at which they would be normally voting, if we had some process for out of precinct voting, which I think would be convenient for everybody, not just 16 to 17-year-olds, it would give them the opportunity to vote at the school closest to them or at their school or whatever is more convenient as we try to open up access. What could we do to advance sort of out of precinct voting? Is that something that we could do municipally?
Thank you for your question, Counselor. I think I can handle answering this one. I think that would pose a greater challenge for our department if we were going to have out of precinct voting for the entire city. That is something that we do with early voting, but it's not something that is done anywhere across the state of Massachusetts. So I think there would be a greater burden there, because then we would have to ensure that we're providing every single ballot style across the city for every single one of our voting precincts. We would have to make sure that we have an appropriate number of ballots. If ballots need to be replenished, it's just going to create an added challenge for our department.
Thank you, Commissioner. And do you know if there's any like specialized equipment? I'm assuming they use some sort of specialized equipment, or they have some sort of specialized ballot when they do this in New Mexico and other places?
Some places have ballot on demand, which we would love to see here, but unfortunately we do not. So right now at the moment, for early voting, what we're doing is just providing a bin with every single ballot style. So we're relying on the poll workers to go through and retrieve the proper ballot style for every single registered voter.
And what is, just so that I know, what is a ballot on demand?
A ballot on demand is, sometimes it depends on where you are. Sometimes it can just be you get a card and you put it into a machine, and the machine automatically prints the appropriate ballot style for that voter based on where they live and who their representatives are going to be. But again, for the city of Boston, unfortunately, we don't have that. It will be great when the time comes that we do. It will make administering elections so much easier.
We're in budget season, so I appreciate you raising up that there's some cool machine that just tells you and gives you what you need. And so thank you so much for that. And thank you to Nesaj who I see is still here. I know you have to leave at 11:30, so hopefully there's room for another thing. It's good to see the OB Tigers in the house, but thank you for your advocacy and thank you for being here. I remember being in high school and free periods were not things I gave away easily. So thank you for being here for this. I don't think I have any questions for you because everybody's already asked them. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be here and to be such a great advocate for early voting and why it's necessary. And with that, I don't know if anybody has any second follow-up questions for the administration so that I can release them and go to the advocates.
No, but I'm curious if the administration would be, if there's any, you'll probably listen into the public hearing afterwards in case some of our advocates do have any specific things that will inspire you all or some thoughts that you may have. We'd love to hear your feedback thereafter.
We're happy to listen in and weigh in.
Thank you, Commissioner Tavares. And so with that, I'm going to now transition to the advocate panel.
Tanya has her hand up. I'm sorry, Tanya.
Oh, there it is, Tanya Anderson. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry. I actually was going to say, I was under the impression that we were moving on, and I was going to thank the advocates that were here waiting, but then that's next. So I apologize.
No worries. No worries. They're going up now. Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Look, I gave you a new job. Thank you, Councilor Anderson. Thank you, Commissioner Tavares. Thank you, Assistant Registrar Sabino Piemonte. And so now we're going to transition to our advocates. I believe they are all here. As I look at this, we'll be joined later or soon by Willie Sullivan, the Senior Director of Campaigns in Scotland Electoral Reform Society. We are currently joined by Director Cheryl Crawford, the Executive Director at Mass Vote, and Vanessa Snow, the Director of Policy and Organizing at Mass Vote. We are also joined by Brandon Klugman, Associate Director of Campaigns at Generation Citizen, and Naysaj Ware has already gone, but she will also be here for this part of the panel as well. And so with that, I don't know what order the advocates would prefer to go in, but please feel free to go in whichever order makes the most sense. And if we can start with Vanessa Snow from Mass Vote, actually, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, Chair Arroyo and Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach and the esteemed members of the council. My name is Vanessa Snow, and I am the Policy and Organizing Director of Mass Vote. As many of you know, Mass Vote is a nonpartisan, nonprofit issue advocacy organization that's dedicated to voting rights. And today, Mass Vote is proud to speak on support of docket number 0185, a home rule petition to lower the voter age to 16 for Boston's municipal elections. And there are many reasons why. Kind of my personal connection to this issue, as some people on the council and the other advocates, I first got involved in community organizing and civic engagement at the age of 14. So that's about 20 years ago. And I was part of a community organization that had successfully worked to lower the voting age to 16 to the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Council. So just one example is that young people do have the right to vote on neighborhood council elections in Jamaica Plain. So Jamaica Plain is a little bit ahead, and youth are actually also able to serve on the neighborhood council as well. And then also for maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, working with the Hyde Square Task Force, I worked with several civics classes across the city in BPS high schools on civic engagement, participatory action research projects. And so I'm very familiar with the work that our schools are already doing to prepare our young people to be civically engaged. So some of the reasons why we should lower the voting age, the first is practical. And, people have already mentioned 16 and 17-year-olds are already allowed to drive, work, and pay taxes. If we provide them with such responsibility and trust, why can't we simply just add voting rights to that list? 16 and 17-year-olds have so much at stake in Boston. They go to school here, they live in their homes, they rely on public transportation, they walk through the parks, and they depend on public safety personnel. Each of these areas are directly impacted by those who serve as mayor and on the city council. As a result, it's only fair that 16 and 17-year-olds have a say in who represents them in City Hall. Yet it is not only on these issues that 16 and 17-year-olds deserve a voice. They are inheriting a planet that is fundamentally altered by climate change. They are reckoning years later with the death of George Floyd and what exactly criminal justice is supposed to mean. For all these reasons, they deserve to have their voice heard and votes counted in local elections. And alongside the fact that this reform is practical, it is also positive. Research reveals that civic participation increases in long term when 16 and 17-year-olds are granted the right to vote. This is critical for a city like Boston, where we're lucky to see a third of all registered voters turn out in a municipal election. Plus, the interest of voting spreads when 16 and 17-year-olds become more engaged in the electoral process. They make those around them more engaged. They talk to their parents about the election, and their parents will talk to others. Additionally, if voters are allowed to start casting ballots locally when they're 16, then they will be more likely to turn out to vote throughout the rest of their lives. Boston would not be the first U.S. community to lower the voting age in municipal elections to 16. Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., did so in 2013. And when 16 and 17-year-olds actually did turn out, they turned out double the rate of voters ages 18 and older. And this election made clear that 16 and 17-year-olds want to vote and do vote. 4 other cities in Maryland have lowered the voting age to 16, and in Oakland, California, they lowered the voting age to 16 for school board elections. This is a city of nearly 450,000 people, and it makes it the largest in the country to lower the voting age to 16. So given these reasons, we urge you to support docket number 0185. It is long past time we offer 16 and 17-year-olds of Boston the chance to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Snow. Mr. Klugman, and I do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I am not, please let me know, but the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You got it exactly right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the council, for the opportunity to join you here today. I am here on behalf of Generation Citizen, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit working to ensure that all students have access to project-based civics education that prepares them for lifelong, informed, engaged citizenship. Our organization will reach about 750 Boston students with civics education programming this school year and thousands more across the state. And we know, as others have mentioned, that extending voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds for local elections can and will help young people foster a lifelong commitment and lifelong habit of civic engagement and participation. The others have mentioned, the research on this is clear that 16 is a better time than 18 to build that habit and start on the road to becoming a lifelong voter. As others have also mentioned, and as Vanessa just talked about a little bit, the cities that have implemented 16-year-old voting elsewhere in the United States have seen overwhelmingly positive results. They have seen 16 and 17-year-olds vote at higher rates than older age groups, showing that it's a better time to build that habit. They've also seen an increase in interest in city programming and city services and more vibrant discussion around community issues. I had the chance to talk with one of the city council members from one of those pioneering cities about what they've noticed in addition to just the numbers. And they told me that 16 and 17-year-olds, in their words, were acting like residents with a stake in the city, making requests, sharing input, just like highly engaged citizens who are able to vote in local elections, which is exactly what everyone wants to see. We know, and as has been demonstrated today, that many 16 and 17-year-olds in Boston are already highly engaged and working to make the city better in countless ways. We're excited that this would take that engagement one step further. 9 cities and towns in Massachusetts have already approved home rule petitions on this exact issue in the past several years. And action by the city of Boston would, of course, represent a major step forward for the entire state, which has already considered the issue in many localities. I also want to mention and share appreciation for the Boston City Council's action in 2019 when the council approved a resolution supporting state legislation at the time that sought to allow cities to expand voting rights to 16, 17-year-olds without needing to go through the home rule petition process. We are really grateful for the council's leadership on that resolution a couple of years ago, and we're thrilled to see the council now considering the actual home rule petition proposal from the city of Boston. The last thing I want to mention is my great appreciation for the many counselors who have mentioned this morning the importance of strong civics education in our schools. We know that students learn best when what they learn in the classroom is relevant to life outside of the classroom. And we know that there is no better way to make civics education relevant than by actually extending the opportunity to participate in our democracy in the most fundamental way through voting in our elections. So all that said, we encourage the City Council to approve this home rule petition. We look forward to seeing the continued vibrant participation of 16 and 17-year-olds and all young people in all aspects of civic life. And we're happy to be part of the conversation on how to do this and how to do it right when it comes to the implementation, the logistics, and then the work to continue educating young people for lifelong informed, engaged citizenship.
Thank you, sir. And I don't know if anybody else from the advocates panel would like to speak. If you would, the floor is yours right now. Did I see Ms. Crawford, Mrs. Clyburn Crawford?
Yes, Vanessa did a great job. First of all, I want to say good morning, Chairman Arroyo and lead sponsors, and to the rest of this esteemed council. Thank you so much for this timely hearing. Vanessa's representing Mass Vote with our point of view. I just wanted to throw in there that every movement has been led by youth, right? Like, and the sooner we get them, I know I heard someone say earlier that the earlier we get youth involved civically, it's the habit that they form, thereby creating this culture of civic engagement and civic participation. They need to be in the know. They are mature. They're mature enough to drive, to pay taxes, to work, right? You know, I think that this is a learning curve, as we've had so many issues through COVID. COVID ripped the Band-Aid off of so many things that just really lifted up the need to have as many voices at the table as possible. I think the only way that we're going to be, they are a critical part of our movement. In order for us to pass the torch adequately, we need to get them involved earlier and let them see what this is all about and how this is impacting their lives. You know, we have a lot of challenges, and it's been said several times already today, so many challenges with our adults. Ms. Ware said it perfectly, right? Like, we try to say that they're immature. We have many adults that are immature, that don't know their government system. They don't know who their city councils are, things of that nature. I think the youth tie into this in two ways. One, they're great messengers for their parents that may not know. And it's just that, you know, with the times, the way they are right now, we need to be holding on to our youth in any way possible. And if that means getting them to become civically engaged in their own communities, that is what's going to help us, right? Like, we need as many messengers as possible. I won't belabor the point, but I think it's just critical that we have youth and that we put the civics back into the school system in a meaningful way. Thank you very much for this hearing.
Thank you. And if Mr. Sullivan is able to join us once he's in, we'll have an opening and we'll open it up to questions. I hope he is able to join us. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to the original sponsors, beginning with Councilor Mejia.
Thank you. And I'm so incredibly grateful to all of our advocates for not just showing up, but for always making sure that folks are civically engaged and participating in their own lives. And I just wanted to just uplift something that Cheryl just talked about. around the way I see this is an opportunity to really not only flex that political muscle, but to continue to condition it, right? From what I understand, it normally takes 6 years to turn a non-voter into a super voter, right? And if we're really serious about making sure that those who are living the realities are actively engaged, I think starting them young, we'll start to see in neighborhoods that have been traditionally, where we see a low voter turnout, we'll start seeing that year after year, as they continue to flex that muscle, that we're gonna start seeing a larger voter turnout in some of our communities. And I think I just wanted to just uplift that. The importance of that repetition is really important. And I think 6 years is what it takes to go from a non-voter to a super voter. So let's make sure that we start them young. I just have a few questions, and I basically, you know, this is, I have a question for mass voting as well as for Brandon. Can you just tell us a little bit about what the work of lowering the voting age has looked like in other cities? I know you mentioned that, but can you just talk a little bit about some of the best practices that we can take on through our own fight here in the city of Boston? And then for Vanessa, I'll just drop this question in so that you can start thinking about it. How can we make sure that political organizations in Boston are also prepared for this new rise in young people voting? Like, I'd love to hear a little bit from the nonprofit sector. Like, what do we need to do to help support that infrastructure as well?
I actually can't talk that much to what it looks like in Maryland and Oakland, except I know that Oakland, it's limited to the school committee. And so, I mean, it would be interesting to perhaps talk with the elections departments in those cities in Maryland to see how they were able to implement it logistically, because there might be some best practices there. In terms of how we can engage, I mean, there's so many different, I think Boston has so many great youth organizations, and, you know, even like the city's youth jobs program. You know, like, I feel like most high school cities, students in Boston really do know the role that city government plays in their life. I think, like, you know, having them, you know, they could potentially, their school could be their voting place. You know, so it might just be a matter of them going down to the cafeteria during their lunch break. And, you know, in that way, it'll be easier for them to vote than a lot of other people. But we also know that we need to generally expand how accessible it is for all people to vote in this city, you know, like, and there are so many different other reforms that we could explore, like such as, you know, free public transportation, or even turning election day into a holiday. Those types of things could also help increase voter turnout across the board, and I think most definitely would increase access for young people. And you know, like, we're working on a lot of those reforms also at the state level.
Thank you for that. And I just have to say, Vanessa, you know, I love the fact that you answered the question that I had specifically for Brandon. So I give you an A+ for answering what other folks can do. So thank you for doing that. And I really do appreciate that. And I really do appreciate in terms of infrastructure and some of the ideas, because I think it's important for the elections department to think about the ease and how we go about making this not just a reality in terms of passing this through our home rule petition, but then setting them up for success through building that infrastructure. So thank you for that. Okay, Brendan, so the question specifically around what it looks like in other cities, can you dive in a little bit around that? And if you could share just some, if you have some initial thoughts around logistically how we can implement this and supporting nonprofit organizations in that process.
Yes, absolutely. So, excuse me. So based on my sort of, you know, work and awareness of how this has worked in other places, the questions that we've heard this morning around logistics and implementation are the exact questions that these pioneering cities asked at the outset of their processes that allowed them to then implement successfully. They focused on logistics, focused on implementation from the very start, which is why it's so encouraging to see that conversation emerge today. I mean, some of the finer points, I think, depend on, you know, the state laws in these different places. But for example, I know these Maryland cities have separate ballots for 16 and 17-year-olds who are only eligible on the local level versus the typical ballot for someone who's eligible for every election, just like we heard discussed earlier today. And so I think that from what we heard this morning, the council is absolutely going about this in a way that, based on what we know from elsewhere, will set us up to have this implemented as smoothly as possible. And the other thing that I think has made other cities successful in implementing this is including the right stakeholders who are in a position to then do a lot of successful voter education work from the beginning. So that as soon as that law was passed, as soon as the new procedures were implemented, the education efforts in the community could start making sure that everybody who was newly eligible to vote was aware of that new eligibility and had the information they needed to go ahead and take advantage of it. And so I think that, you know, it's clear that the council is certainly going about this in a way that will set everyone up to be able to share that information and set this policy up to not only be passed and implemented well, but then to also have a really successful impact in the years down the road.
Thank you for that. Councilor Arroyo, I don't have any other questions. I think that our panelist has done an amazing job, and I know we have a lot of colleagues on the call, so I just wanted to yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. And if Mr. Sullivan comes in, I'll give everybody a chance if they would like to ask him any questions. But with that, Councilor Bach.
Thanks so much. I was wondering if maybe, I don't know, Vanessa or Cheryl, if you guys had any comments on, it seems as though, you know, one significant community in Boston that this would go some way towards enfranchising is our immigrant community. I think, you know, Councilor Lara mentioned there's another hearing before the council about potentially letting immigrant residents of the city vote, something I'm supportive of. But separately, I know we have a lot of, you know, first generation immigrant families where even if we don't yet have that passed, this would sort of give the young person in the family an ability to kind of speak for that interest and perspective. And so I'm just wondering if you guys could speak on that a bit, because I know how much work MassVote does around organizing and uplifting those communities.
Well, yeah, definitely having young people vote, it would be one more vote, if not the only vote that a family would have. You know, and I know for a lot of us who come from those first generations, you know, we're voting, you know, for all the people before us who weren't given that right. And so I don't think those decisions would be taken very lightly. And I guess in terms of, I mean, I think it's also, you know, like, I think there'll be like a lot of work to do at the State House right now, you know, where we have the Votes Act in the conference committee, which would, you know, we're hoping that we're still holding out to see if we can get the election day voter registration too, which would also be a huge positive reform in our electoral process, especially for many of our families, you know, immigrants, working class people who are often so, you know, transient or often being displaced. Same day voter registration would allow them to be able to, you know, they may show up to a voting location, their address has changed, so they, you know, they can no longer vote at that address, but it wouldn't mean that they would be left to do a provisional ballot. But they would actually be able to update their address and vote in that election. And so, you know, I think, you know, there are several different things that we can do to expand the vote for citizens and non-citizen residents alike.
Great. I see we've been joined by, and sorry to cut you off there, Councilor Bach, but I see we've been joined by Mr. Sullivan. I'd like to give him a chance to do an intro so that folks can ask questions again. But thank you for joining us, Mr. Sullivan. I know we're on different time zones, but we are united in cause. And so the floor is yours. for any opening statement that you would like to give.
Thanks very much. Thanks for asking me to come and make a contribution. I think I was asked to talk mainly about the experience of Scotland when in 2014 we had an independence referendum here, and it was the first time that 16, 17-year-olds were allowed to vote in public elections. And so there was quite a lot of research done around about that time, mainly by Edinburgh University, and there was just a general attention paid to the fact that these group of young voters were going to take part. I would say behind all that, I mean, there's in Scotland and in the UK as a whole, there's steady decline in numbers of people that come out and vote and take part in public elections. It goes up and down a bit, but generally it's not good. And in Scottish Parliament elections and local government elections here, you know, we're lucky if we get 60% in the Parliament elections, and it's down in 30s and 40s for the local government elections. So you know, the referendum was a very high-profile political event. On the decline in turnout, there was theory that, you know, it's because once young people leave school and go out into the world of work or education, then you've kind of lost the chance of getting their interests in politics, and giving the vote to younger people and using the education system as a way to kind of give people information about the vote was seen as a way of kind of engaging people early before they were lost and moved on to other parts of their life. And there is some evidence from that time that did happen. I would say there was a lot of attention, as I said, there was a lot of attention given to young people, and they were involved in debates, and because it was such a big, significant issue in Scotland, a lot of them did engage in it, and you could hear them during the campaign period and up to it on media, being, you know, really articulate, really well informed, and really curious about what was going on. I think that was one of the most important things. I guess when people get to 18 and they expect to get the vote, as it was then it's almost like they're kind of slightly jaded by that point. But by the time, because they were given something special at that, and there was a bit of attention on them, I think there was a real engagement in it, and the turnout showed that in the end. I mean, it was a really high turnout anyway. It was like in the mid-80s for the referendum. But you know, that was echoed in the votes in 16, 17-year-olds. So it was a success. Some of the other data that came out, and I'm sorry, I've been ill with COVID and got the time mixed up, so I've not got all the data that I might have in normal times. It's just more of a kind of my reflections on what happened. But yeah, there was a fair bit of evidence that some of these young people were going back into their homes and creating discussion and debate amongst their parents, who were slightly more jaded by the political system and processes, and kind of there was evidence that actually had a positive effect on them going and voting. Young people went in there. How far that, I mean, I think that cadre has in general been more engaged and more active in voting than young people were previous to giving them the vote. That might have been because it was a particularly special political moment. It was a very big political event, the independence referendum. But I also think it was about the debates, the focus, the tying in with the education system round about that time. I mean, Scotland, we're quite lucky, and we've got a programme what's called Modern Studies, which is a political education programme that's been going on for decades, and probably in qualifications holds similar merit to getting a qualification in history or geography. A qualification in modern studies gets you the same entry qualifications to higher education, etc. So it was kind of tying together the fact that young people were given the vote at 16, 17, along with the, you know, tying that into education and a focus on asking them what they thought and allowing their curiosity to be satisfied about what was going on in politics and in representation and in voting in elections. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think one of the wonders of virtual Zoom hearings is that we get to then sort of diversify and increase the number of voices on our panel in panels. So thank you so much for being here. We're on Councillor Bach right now. So if you have questions, Councillor Bach, I'm going to keep it with you. If I know we've already gone through Councillor Mejia, but Councillor Mejia, are you okay with us going through the line and then come? Okay, perfect. And so Councillor Bach, the floor is yours to ask whatever questions you have.
Great. Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. And thanks so much, Willie, for being here. Really appreciate it. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, my understanding is that since the referendum, 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland have continued to be able to vote on Scottish-only elections, but not in the UK-wide ones. And I'll tell you, I'm curious about that because that's basically what we're proposing here. We have the ability to propose as a council that they be able to vote in our city elections, but we can't. We're not able to drive their access to voting for the state and national. So it would be a similar thing where folks are enfranchised for one set of elections and not for another. And I mean, we think that might engender some impatience, but maybe that will help drive change as well. And I just wondered if, but it's not obviously something we in the States do a lot. We haven't historically done a lot of this kind of different electorates for different things. You guys do more of it over there. So I wondered if you could just speak a little bit about that element and what that's been like for the 16, 17-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, it is different. So 16, 17-year-olds in Scotland can vote in local authority elections, like city council elections, and can vote in Scottish Parliament elections. And that's the only two public elections that they can vote in, and not for the UK national government at Westminster. So, I mean, I think if I remember rightly, the levels of continuing to vote haven't been what they were at the referendum, but turnouts for 16, 17-year-olds in the other elections that they are allowed to vote in is similar to what it is for the wider population. And I think we did see a whole cadre of kind of activist interest in young people in politics after that time. There's some frustration that we can't vote in Westminster, definitely, but I think you're right. That is a positive pressure and a kind of positive anger, and I think there's a big move here to get them the right to vote at Westminster and national government elections. And I think if the government was to change, it would come, because the Labour Party, which is the opposition party in the UK, has it as a policy, and lots of the other minor parties, Lib Dems, SNP, etc., have it as a policy. It's only the ruling party at the moment that doesn't support votes for 16 and 17. Mainly on the basis of what happened in Scotland. Another interesting point that I'd like to make about what happened in Scotland, before the 16, 17-year-old vote was introduced, the majority of the public in Poland was against it. It was quite high, actually, in the high 60s and 70s. The public didn't want 16 and 17-year-olds to have votes. But once they'd experienced it and saw what happened, that rocketed to the other way around, and there was like very high public support for 16, 17-year-olds to have votes after they saw how they performed and behaved and the positives of it in the independence referendum.
Yeah, no, and I just want to echo when I was in the UK, I mean, what Willie said about there was a real sense in terms of the debates that you heard on the radio about it and the articles you saw, that the 16, 17-year-olds were having the sort of like most deep, serious public debates, and quite often they were sort of the prism through which the rest of the country was thinking about the issue. And I think it definitely kind of just underscored to anybody watching that obviously 16 and 17-year-olds are more than capable of really active political engagement. So I suspect we would have a similar sense here if we went through with this. So just, really, really grateful for the example. Like the chair said, it's great to have virtual hearings for this purpose. And I think it's, I wanted to invite you to just underscore that this isn't some, crazy thing that no one's ever done. You guys have done it, and I think it's added to the vitality of your political discourse. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Next, we're going to go to Councillor, let me just make sure, Councillor Braden.
Thank you. It's lovely to hear a Scottish accent. I'm from across the shock in Northern Ireland, so Willie, it's nice to see you. You know, in terms of, we watched the Scottish referendum with great interest, especially anyone with context from Northern Ireland. I think it was a 93% turnout in that election, that referendum. Am I correct? It was something phenomenal anyway. We don't hear you.
Willie, you're muted.
Mr. Sullivan, you're muted, and I was muted telling you you're muted. I'm sorry.
He's still muted.
Hold on, let me just hit that ask to unmute button. Let me make sure. There you go.
I was actually looking at the page to see if I could find the turnout. Yeah, it was the highest thing we've ever turned out. Was it 93? It could have been. It's like I can't, as I say, I've not had time to look at data and stuff, and it's a while ago. So yeah, it was the highest turnout I've ever had in a public election. I thought it was in the high 80s, but could have been as high as 93.
Yeah, no, and that's just proof of the concept that if you engage with our younger voters and you get a level of enthusiasm and empower them to use their franchise, that our voter turnout we have an abysmal turnout in municipal elections in Boston at times. So I think this would be a great way to drive turnout and increase civic engagement among a very important section of our community. So in terms of youth engagement, those young leaders, are they that were involved in that first referendum, is there evidence that they continue their civic engagement and voting patterns going forward, Willie?
I'd say there's a whole cadre of young people who are involved in Scottish politics that are only involved in Scottish politics because of that time and that period. And some of them were part of that 16, 17-year-old cadre for sure. So yeah, I mean, the Jan Eriksson, I think, that did all the research from Edinburgh, and there was a number of presentations post actually to look at it. European Union funded a lot of that. It was a wholly positive outcome, and I think the continuation of engagement was definitely there. As I said, I've not had time to revisit these papers, and it was a while ago, but I can remember that it was seen as a wholly positive exercise, and the ongoing outcome and impacts were pretty impressive. I remember that.
That's very good. Thank you. Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. And I love the love for the accents from home or close to home. That warmed me up. Councillor Fernandez Anderson, the floor is yours. If you're ready. If you're not ready, then we'll kick it over to Councillor Louis-Jean. Councillor Louis-Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want to thank all the panelists, especially Massvo, Vanessa, and Cheryl, for all of your insight, and honestly having insight as well from Brandon and Mr. Sullivan, especially from across the water. Really appreciate it, and thank you for giving insight as to, this is very much doable, having 16 and 17-year-olds vote. And how it can be really habit forming, which is really important to bring people into our democracy, especially our young folks who in so many ways lead the way. So just thank you for being here.
Thank you. I don't know if Councillor Anderson Fernandez is back, but yes, she is. So the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Councillor Arroyo, Chairman. Thank you for all the panelists. That was very informative. Really appreciate all of the work and the passion that goes into it. And it seems like, you really made this more informative than I was prepared for. And I really appreciate that. Looking forward to more dialogue and seeing where this goes. And again, once again, thank you so much for the youth that testified, as well as the commissioner and Sabino. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, and then Councilor Worrell, followed by myself.
Yes, thank you to the panelists, and thank you for all your work in advocating for increasing voter participation. I just want one question is, and anyone can pick this up, but sounds like it's happening over in Scotland. Is there any infrastructure to kind of educate the youth, organize the youth that's going on in Scotland, and to retain them, or even before they're 16 and 17 years old? Is there anything like that you guys are doing over there to encourage them to sign up to participate in voting and to be registered voters? Or is it even like civics in schools? Can you talk about what that infrastructure looks like in Scotland?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. As I said, there's the education civics programme, which has been going on for decades now, and is actually a formal qualification called Modern Studies, which is equal to some of the other, more traditional subjects like geography, history, English, maths. So there's a recognised qualification that would weigh with them in getting into university called Modern Studies. So I think that's been pretty important. And that ties in well with people being allowed to vote, because if they're given all this information about the political system, how to vote, what the institutions are, what the city council does, for example, and then they're not allowed to express that through a vote, then I think that's where that disconnect happens. Yeah, we do, probably similar to in Boston, we do have like the Electoral Commission here. I know we've not got an Electoral Commission there, but there is government bodies or pseudo-government. They're funded through the state, but they're separate from government, who run education campaigns and promote some of that education and advertising aimed particularly at young people, to encourage them to go out and use their vote. And then there's youth organisations who see it as their kind of duty to make the youth voice heard, because these people are getting services and getting representation and stuff, and if they're not being able to express their political will, then it's kind of not really fair. And it's I don't know what happens there, but certainly here it's the older people that all go out and vote, which is right enough, but sometimes there's conflicts between what an older, wealthier group of people and a younger, less well-off group of people want, and if they're not expressing their vote, then it's always going to, the parties are not aiming their policies at that group of voters, and they're kind of left out, and that feeds into the disillusionment going forward. It's a kind of kick-off right away that nobody's representing me because I don't vote, so why should I bother taking part in the system?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. And you actually asked, and after that, Councilor Mejia, you were first, and you didn't get to ask questions to our latest panel, so I'll go to you after me, which will be quick, because Councilor Worrell took my question about the schools. But I do have one question for Mr. Sullivan specifically. In what ways do they go about making the registration process easier for youth in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean,
registration to vote.
Yeah. It's not as easy as we'd like it to be. I mean, it's just a case of like, you can go online and fill out an application. I think you have to sign it, which is always the problem, right? Because it's not as simple as just going online and doing it. So that's a barrier. I mean, we've argued in the Electoral Reform Society for same-day registration for a long time, and I heard you mention it there. I think that's a huge benefit that people, because many people turn up because they think they can vote, and then they're going, you've not been registered, and you have to register like 2-3 weeks before. So it is definitely a barrier. Yeah, I think the schools, some depended on the education authority area, some of the schools are more than happy to encourage their pupils to vote, which was good. And then other education authorities were less willing to get involved in politics. But I think there's a really good example of some of the schools encouraging people to register and to vote, and reminding the pupils that they should register and vote. And certainly within the universities, although that's a slightly older group, there's big registration drives.
Thank you, and it's we've been fighting for same-day voting registration. I think we'd love automatic registration. It's funny to hear the same problems in different places. Literally, we have the same early deadline to voting that makes very little sense, frankly, in any practical way, except that it disenfranchises. And so trying to make sure that I ask folks specifically questions that later on they'll hit me and I'll say, oh, I should have asked that, and I hate that. But in terms of the specific, and this is for either Mr. Klugman or our folks over at Mass Vote, do we have an idea of when we get to implementation of this, because I'm going to will this into existence, what methods we can use to actually engage beyond what obviously Scotland is doing, basically what we're doing, but other than those things, do we have any idea what kinds of things we can do here in Boston specifically to engage our youth vote and ensure that we're doing things right? I think about, and again, I think it's federal, but I remember we had to register, I believe it's like a false registration for the draft because we no longer have the draft, but I remember we had to register for the draft in high school. I think our high school automatically did that. I don't know why there's no reason why our high schools couldn't automatically register people to vote either if they were eligible. But I guess the question is, are there ideas that we have for engaging that constituency specifically for registration?
So I'll jump in. I know that we're already working in the Boston public school system, like the Election Advisory Council, one of the other commissioners is already in there engaging high school students. We're doing voter registration drives during the daytime while they're in school. Ever since we implemented the early voting, 16 and 17-year-olds, the capacity to register early, we've been going into the school systems and setting up tables during their lunch hours and different, at their rallies or what have you, and working with the city council, the election advisory council, to make sure that we're giving them the opportunity to register and keeping that in a file. One of the things that we started a couple of years ago, kind of suspended it, about to bring it back, was this whole postcard campaign. Like, once they're registered to vote at age 16, they cannot vote until they're 18. But what do you do in between? You do things like you keep them engaged with projects and different initiatives, civic engagement kind of projects, right? We do a postcard, and we do this, and we call it for the youth. We do it for the youth, 16 and 17-year-olds, but we also do it for all of our our new registered voters, right? Like, keeping them engaged, because we'll register somebody, let's say now, this is March, we're doing all of our voter registration. Well, they don't even know what to do when it comes to September, the primary election. So engaging them with a postcard that might say, you're registered, number one. Two, who's on the ballot, helping them to understand the difference between municipal positions and state positions, because they don't know. They interchange city councils with state representatives all the time. It's two different kinds of jobs. Helping them to really understand what's on ballot questions. What are ballot questions? How are they implemented? So I think there are so many ways that between the age, if we're registering them 16 and 17, we have a year to 2 years to really fully engage them. Part of that could be doing civics in high school, right? Like making sure that they're getting civics in high school so that they can understand the three divisions of government. Yeah, I mean, just all of those kinds of educational tools to get them excited. And I think, we were used to run our Young Civic Leaders program, which we shuttered because of COVID, but we're about to bring that piece back. And that's where all of this kind of action happened, was in our Young Civic Leaders program, which we too think is really critical that we bring back our youth, right? couldn't engage them during COVID, but it's important because they lead the charge. They think of all these innovative ways. And that's why I love being around young people like you all and the high school students, right? They think of different ways, think outside of the box. You know, when you've been doing this for a long time, you have a set way in which you think things should be done. Young people come along and they think creatively and they think outside of the box on how we can engage them and other ways to engage their counterparts.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think we'll also, having young people involved in the voting process, I think will also require, the city council and like all municipal government to be more active and visible in the schools. So thinking about, how are you making the hearings more accessible so that young people can not only vote, but also engage in the governance process as well. Having students in a school building, it oftentimes, they aren't able, well, now thanks to Zoom, if they don't have a free period, they're not going to be able to attend hearings such as this or follow municipal government so closely. But perhaps now that they will be your voters, they'll also want some more opportunities to engage with you all.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I was going to say what was really successful was the budget participatory project, right? Like really getting young people involved. And they love that, right? Like feeling like their voices were being heard for monies that were going to be spent on them anyway or in our communities. How could they lend a voice to how it should be spent? I thought that was an excellent thing when we did that. And that's the same kind of engaging activities that we need to do with our youth.
Thank you. And I think that's an important aspect of democracy in general. I have found that people become more engaged when they feel like they are actually being heard. And so certainly with youth where there is no, specifically under 18, where there's no mechanism for them to actually have their voice be heard, I think there is even more of a disconnect there. I am just grateful to all of you for being here. I am done with my questions. I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Mejia, who is an original sponsor of this, for any follow-up questions he has. If anybody has round 2 questions, raise your hands. Otherwise, we'll just go to the original sponsors for closing statements. But Councilor Mejia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again, Mr. Sullivan, for joining us. I also love the accent. It brings me great joy as an English language learner from the Dominican Republic. It's always great to hear different accents, especially on our Zoom calls. So first, thank you for being here. I just have a quick follow-up question. One of the reasons why I'm so deeply committed to civic engagement and youth participation is, for those who you may not know this, but I won my election in 2019 by one single vote. And I've dedicated my entire life to working with young people and have often felt that those who are, as our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley says, closest to the pain should be closest to the power. We believe those who are living the reality should be the ones who are informing policies and having a front seat at the table. And if young people are not our future, they are our today, and they're in their here and now, and we need to create opportunities for them to be actively engaged. My question is specifically around if you could just share with us some of the pushback that you potentially faced when you were going through this process from some folks, because I know here in the city of Boston, we've heard a lot from folks that they don't think that young people are ready, that they don't have the maturity and an ability to really take on such a big responsibility, but yet they're working 2 to 3 jobs to put food on the table. They are able to get their driver's license, they're paying taxes, they're doing all of these things that often some adults struggle to do, to be honest with you. So I'm just curious, what type of narrative did you face as you work towards pushing your initiative forward, and any particular language that you can share with us so that we can counteract some of that naysayer syndrome that we find ourselves oftentimes having to deal with here in the city of Boston?
Yeah, well, I think you just described exactly the same narrative that we faced in Scotland, which is, young people don't know, they're too young, they've not had enough experience, and just like you said, we know and people know that there's people who are 16, 17 who are just as experienced and have got just as wise sometimes as people my age. So yeah, and I think as I said, when you did the public polling before it, it was good that the political parties pushed it through. Not all of them were in favour of it, and there was a lot of politicians that weren't. But I think finding the right spokespeople from that cadre of people, 16 and 17-year-olds who are able to quite easily, show that they're up to it and they have interests. And I think that is one of the key arguments as well. They might see the world slightly differently from somebody my age, but that's not to say that they aren't entitled to have their views represented and to have their interests represented, and to stop that skewing of policy towards away from them because they don't have any political power. But I do think the actual operation of the campaign and the debate, when those voices were heard, kind of put to bed those questions that they're not capable or not able or not experienced enough or don't deserve it. I just think that, and the public polling showed that afterwards, that it just completely switched.
And so you would say it was because of the spokespeople that were driving it? Were there any other tactics that you were able to use that to help influence that decision-making process?
I think it was. It's always better to show than tell, isn't it? So if you've got young people up there who are telling you why they should have that vote, and then showing that they get the political issues from their perspective and they can argue for it, I think that's probably the most powerful message you can have. And the arguments that you used, examples of people who are working 2 jobs, who are paying taxes. You can get married in Scotland when you're 16. You can't vote, so
married at 16.
Yeah. So it's kind of all those arguments about the other things that the state expects of you when you're 16 and 17, but isn't willing to give you a vote. I think it's quite along with the examples of people, very, very well informed and considered 16, 17-year-olds is probably the most powerful way to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And I don't see any other hands raised. And so I would like to give Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach a chance to just close if they have anything they would like to close with before we adjourn.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank all the panelists, the young people that showed up, the advocates, our friend from Scotland, and I hope that those who are tuning in recognize the power of youth and trust this process and continue to stay engaged with us. So thank you to the panelists, thank you to the chair, and thank you to my co-sponsor, Councilor Bach, for joining our office in this fight and making sure that we create space for young people to not only be seen and heard, but to be respected and valued. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach.
Yeah, I want to echo the thanks to Councilor Mejia for co-sponsoring on this, and all the councilors who showed up and expressed their support, and a special thanks to all of our panelists. I think I just really want to underscore that it was something that Willie raised. I think sometimes we talk about engaging young people like it's sort of like a nice to have, or but like really when we talk about representative government and we think about that question of how do you make sure that you're foregrounding the people who have the least financially, are facing the most difficult burdens, whose communities have been least represented, that is in our community here in Boston, just as in Scotland, when we exclude young people, those voices get tamped down, and it affects the policies. And I think there's a huge economic justice component to this in a country where there's still a really substantial economic skew across ages. And I just want to underscore that. And also I'm encouraged by the Scottish example of how, we can sell the public on this. And I think what it comes down to, and Mr. Sullivan alluded to it, is, but I think it's also been what mass votes found time and time again, when you put young people in charge, as Ms. Crawford said, I think it's very hard for anybody who's actually talking to an engaged young person to say that that person shouldn't get to vote. I think it's one of those things where once you're actually in that conversation, one of the core problems of our democracy is not being able to get enough people to show up and make their voices heard. And I think that when you are speaking with a young person who desperately wants to have that say so, that the obvious truth that we should be enabling that just kind of like just emanates. And I think it's a hard thing for people to gainsay when they're actually confronted with it. So I hope that in this conversation, we can create more of those opportunities. And I'm grateful to Nesage for joining us today. Mr. Sullivan, you missed one of our spokespeople who was here earlier, beaming in from a free period in high school. And I think that, and I take Vanessa's point about when it is that we hold these hearings and kind of how we try to actually actively make space for young people to engage given the structure of their days and lives. But grateful, therefore, for Councillor Mejia for getting Nesage here, and just looking forward to more conversation where we've got more of our young people who, again, the City Council knows well because they are, in fact, already very active advocates in the life of the city. And it's time that we kind of respected and registered that with an actual opportunity to vote in our municipal elections. So looking forward to moving this forward, Mr. Chairman. Grateful that the administration showed up in support, and I think they've got some concrete things that we can do to tweak the home rule petition, but I hope we can move this forward. Thanks.
Thank you both. I appreciate all of our advocates for being here, and all of the administration for giving their time, and all the councilors who came. We almost had a full house for this issue. We will be moving forward with a working session once we're able to actually schedule that to move this forward. I expect this will go forward this year, and I'm grateful to everybody for their work on this. So with that, this meeting is adjourned, and I also just want to thank Central staff for, as always, being the folks who make all of this possible and juggling all the things that they juggle. So thank you very much, Central staff. Today it was Carrie, yesterday it was Candace. And so thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Willie.